Okay, today we are welcoming back for the third or fourth time Emily Oster, who is the founder and CEO of Parent Data and has launched her new program called TTC, which stands for Trying to Conceive. And it's a newsletter and a program filled with all the information you could possibly ever need on your Trying to Conceive journey. So we're going to talk to her. Welcome, Emily. I love this whole Trying to Conceive program that you've launched, program, newsletter. It's so information filled. And I feel like this is an area where people really need your sense of calm and like just ease when it comes to chaotic headlines.
Yes.
Because it's such a stressful subject for so many that like tons of people are experiencing on their journey of trying to conceive. So let's just start with like, why tackle that subject for you and all the other things you have going on?
I hear a lot from people about this space. And so, we have a lot of content on pregnancy, but people want the same approach to conception, and they want data. And I think you're right. It's such a complicated and fraught and uncertain space. It's also, and I think this, as we built the content out, this was the piece that kept coming back to me over and over. There is so much misinformation and so much like people hearing things that really aren't so science-based, some of which is very motivated by economic interests and other things, but it feels like a place where people are confused and a little bit lost. And I wanted there to be something where we could say, hey, like this is what the science says. Here's what the best data says about these questions. Like the same approach that I like to take to parenting and pregnancy, just like here's the data so you can make the best decisions for yourself in this space where people are unhappy and stressed out and there's just so much information.
I mean, one of the things that I always love about your approach to a variety of different subjects is that you do go back to the data, and that tends to bring a lot of calm and ease to people in the parenting space, pregnancy space, really any space that you tackle, because there are all these panic headlines, which I love when you go on social media and you're like, another panic headline, like, here we go. When it comes to trying to conceive, though, it's such a sensitive subject where you're trying to balance the data and also something that's a very sensitive subject that's very emotionally charged. So how do you go about doing that in a very sensitive, mindful way?
So one thing is in the content, we tried to produce sort of some of both things. So have some sense of, things that people can read about this experience, about the like support for mental health. So that's one answer to that. I think the other is, for me, I think seeing the data and evidence is often helpful. And so even though it is a sensitive and emotionally fraught topic, I think there's a really big difference between sort of being approached with a panic headline that's like, here are all the things you should worry about, and here are 10 things you're doing wrong when you're trying to conceive. There's a really big difference between that and content that says, here is how it works. And here are the things that we know might work. And here are the things we know might not work. I do think what's been hard about this in the data and what's hard to communicate is that there isn't as much about success as we wish there was, right? So people really they want to know what diet is going to help me conceive. And the answer is we don't really have any data on that. There isn't much that would suggest that any particular diet would be helpful or not helpful. But in this space, because it is so fraught, because people are so hopeful, and because it can be so disappointing, there's this desire for just anything that might help. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to have so much of what is true in the data be yeah, we don't really think that helps. Fertility, a lot of fertility determined by age and genetics. And there's not as much that we can do as we wish there was.
It's interesting because it's a tricky thing to put out information about that subject without leaving people feeling, a lack of hopefulness or a lack of encouragement.
Totally.
But you seem to be doing it in a way, and I'm curious because it's been out now for a couple of weeks and it's still so new, but people are coming to it. People come back to you because they love how, straightforward you are on certain subjects and and just topics. But how has the response been when it comes to talking about a subject that is such a sensitive one?
I think it's been very good in terms of people reading things. And I think there's this sort of, when we think about what we have here in this whole trying to conceive vertical, some of it is about, you are trying to conceive and you've just started this journey, and really we're just trying to educate people about like, what's the right time to have sex, and like, don't make your testicles hot because that's bad for your sperm. So stuff where it's like very valuable, but less fraught. And so there's a piece of just that education, which I think is important and less fraught and well-received. And then there's the pieces about infertility that there just are much more fraught. And I think we've heard many people saying, oh, thank you so much for talking about this. Like, I understand better now how these processes work. And then I think that when you get into infertility, there are so many questions where people are like, what about this very specific thing? What about this specific thing? I was told if I drank this smoothie, this would happen. What about this particular supplement or this supplement? And we're working hard to have content about a lot of that. But I think the reality is that for almost all those things, the answer is there's really no effect of that in the data, or there's nothing that we can see. And I think candidly, sometimes people find that frustrating because they would like to be told that works. And that's, of course, part of why some of this space is so almost predatory, because people are just really interested in hearing that something works, because hope can be so hard to come by. And it's hard to hold that balance of, I want to give you realism, but I want you to have hope. And this space is so hard. Infertility is so tough.
People get very fixed on, or focused on this idea of making all of these adjustments. I have a friend who went through her full trying to conceive journey, and it became her entire life of, I, can't have this kind of water. I have to have this kind of water and these supplements, and I can't use this mascara because it will impact my ability to get pregnant. What is your response to people making that such a big part of their trying to conceive journey?
Yeah, I think this is really challenging because almost none of those things are things where we would have data to show that they would have impacts at all. And the plausible size of the impact, even if you thought, well, we don't have enough data on anything, the plausible size of the impact of changing the kind of water you're drinking or the mascara you're using on your fertility is zero. This just cannot be an important change. And then I think what people say is, well, you don't know that it doesn't work. Like, what is the downside of trying all of these things? And I think then it's really worth asking, for some people, this is a useful coping strategy to say, basically, I'm feeling out of control about this process because it's not working the way I want, or it's not happening the way I expected. And so the kind of right thing for my mental health, for my adaptation, is to feel like I'm doing everything. Mm-hmm. And this is what I'd like to do. And I think that's kind of one kind of person. I do feel that in some cases, people do this and it's not healthy. It's not helping their mental health coping. It's just another thing to obsess about, and to feel bad about, and to feel like it's my fault if this isn't working because I didn't change all of my makeup, or I didn't change all of what I'm doing, and it's yet again my fault. And there's so much in fertility and then in pregnancy and then in parenting where people are blaming themselves. And I think this interacts kind of poorly with that.
One of the things that brought me to you originally many years ago was like this, as I said, this kind of like calm, very straightforward, vibe when it comes to a variety of different subjects that come up in the news or in the parenting space or, pregnancy, all the different things. When it comes to trying to conceive and the panic headlines that come up there, are there ones that have been more surfaced more frequently than others when it comes to people's curiosity or interest or just journey in the trying to conceive space that you tend to tackle over and over again?
So I think one is about age. So all of the if you're over 35, you'll never get pregnant because your eggs are like an ashy heap of death. elderly. And I think that, I've, spent many years debunking that and making the point that, yes, it is true that fertility declines with age, but it doesn't fall off a cliff at 35. And these sort of panicky versions of like, you're running out of time, your eggs are headed towards the cliff, get pregnant now. Yeah. Like that's not quite there. I now field a lot of questions about sperm quality. Actually, sort of there's a set of, what?
I said it's taken a turn from focus on the eggs to
the focus on the sperm. There's a lot of headlines around the idea that sperm counts are declining over time, and pretty soon there'll be no sperm left, which I think is an overstatement, but long shot overstatement of what we see in the data. But there is something real in there actually, which is something like sort of 30 to 50% of infertility is male factor infertility is caused by something that's going on with men. And often we will sort of start with the assumption that it's women. Mm-hmm. And so if you just reminding people like, hey, like don't panic about this, but if you are experiencing infertility, you want to both have a workup. So if it's an issue with him, an issue with you, an issue with the joint between you. And what's nice about sperm is that many of the things that might be wrong with it are fixable because sperm is always being reproduced, unlike eggs. So you can fix it up.
Do you have a huge part of your program that is for people who might not be on the trying to conceive journey, but are, doing this alongside friends, family, loved ones wanting to offer support? We've talked about this, you and I, in different interviews before, which is like what to say, what not to say. And I've talked to a lot of other people on these journeys, but I feel like that would be such a big part of the TTC journey is like, if it's an in-law, if it's a mother, if it's a sister, a brother, a best friend, what do you say and what do you kind of bow out of?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing for the people around you to understand is just exactly what you're going through, right? Mm-hmm. So, there's so much that happens in like an IVF cycle, with eggs and freezing and shots and, putting it back in. And if you're a person going through that, you can learn about it and then you will know about it from the experience. If you are someone who's someone's friend, in some ways, the first step to being a supportive, like person in that is to know what are they going through. And so you don't start the conversation with like, oh my God, there are shots? Like that sounds terrible. Like, what do you so I think this content in many ways is very well suited for like, look, you don't know anything about IVF. Let me tell you like exactly what this process is and why it's different from other processes and, what you need to know in order to understand what's happening with your friends, with your family, with your daughter-in-law, whatever it is.
Is there anything that you would advise just don't ask about it? Don't ask. Because I think that once people start saying I'm on the IVF journey or I'm on the trying to conceive journey, you want to be supportive. And also you want to know like what the phase is, how it's going, to be able to offer your support in different spaces. But also, is that something that you would recommend? Just don't ask?
The best advice I've ever gotten from someone about asking about stuff like this is to start by asking, is this something that you would like to talk about? Because I think that and that's true like in infertility, it's true it's true in any time someone is going through something, they might not want to talk about it or they might want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And just to say like, is this, would you like to talk about how the IVF is going, or is it something you don't want to talk about and we should talk about something else? I would always start there and let people lead. Because you don't want to open with, well, how many rounds have you been through? And like, how many embryos did you get? Did you get a lot of embryos? It was like, because my friend got like 40 embryos. Did you have 40 embryos? Or were you like, that's not the best place to begin the conversation.
Right. It's also, I even see it with my sisters. My sister is younger than me, and I see it with her friends who are doing egg freezing. Yeah. But let's talk about egg freezing.
Yeah.
But to finish my thought on the egg freezing, the conversation of how many eggs did you get? How like I'm just like, this feels
yet another thing to win, yet another thing to achieve. Yeah. How many eggs did you get?
Maybe let's not talk about that, because then you always have somebody who's like, has a really low amount that they've been able to, and then it's always, a challenging subject between friends and things like that. But so egg freezing, that's part of, often a lot of people's trying to conceive journey, no matter what version or part of the journey that they're on. And it's also something that is, again, a sensitive subject. How do you talk about the subject if you think someone in your life should freeze their eggs and not miss the opportunity to do that? And do you stay out of it completely? Is it something that, in a relationship that the other person should bring up or not bring up or let the doctor bring up? It's a touchy subject.
It's a touchy subject.
So how do you talk about that?
So I would say the first thing is just to like complain for a second. I think we need to be educating people about their fertility when they are younger. So many people, and this is part of the motivation for this trying to conceive, will sort of get to like their mid 30s without actually much of an understanding of like how it all works. Not like, you understand how sex works, but the idea of like, what are the times of the month that you would, you can't get pregnant any time of the month. You have to have the sperm there when you ovulate. This is how it works. Like, so little of that is communicated to kids in school or at any other time. So I wish there was more of that. And then that feeds into helping people understand things like egg freezing. Like, okay, we understand that fertility declines with age. We understand like eventually here are the ways that you could in principle, use frozen eggs. And then you think about like, we'd be in a much better position to talk about, is egg freezing a good idea if it were just part of something that people kind of had a general conversation about. I think what's hard about egg freezing is we don't actually know how effective it is. It hasn't really been around for long enough for us to really have a good sense of like, if you have 15 eggs, what share of them are likely to survive the defrosting process and produce good embryos. And it's too new to know all of those details. And there's a lot of disagreement about like, what is the right age at which to freeze your eggs? Your eggs are really young, like at 22, like your eggs are like super nice, they're all healthy. But also there's a good chance that between 22 and, 35 or whatever, you will meet somebody and work on conception in the old fashioned way. And so then it will have been a waste to spend all this money on freezing your eggs, which is really expensive.
Yeah.
So,
and then it's also, for people who go into trying to explore about, what the process is for egg freezing, it's not like something that you can just say, I'm going to go do it next week.
Right. It's not it's not like banking your sperm, which like, it's just kind of like you go in, you do it at the cup, you put it in the bank, it's fine. This is like an involved medical process that, takes time and money and is physically challenging.
And then there's always, now especially people saying, I did it and I already happened to get pregnant naturally. And now what do I do with all of these frozen eggs that I have, which then is a whole other conversation. And, one of the big parts of your trying to conceive program is helping people in their trying to conceive journey, but also giving a lot of support and information to different kinds of families or individuals who are exploring the family process. And that could be an individual doing it on their own. It could be someone in the LGBTQIA+. There's a lot of different ways you can grow your family, which is such a huge blessing. And it also
incredibly confusing.
Very confusing.
Yes. So we have like a really large library of content, mostly written by Maria Goodman, and they're a midwife who works with a lot of couples who are building families in ways that are non-traditional. What's interesting about that content is for a lot of people, when you come into this, there is actually like automatically a choice at the beginning, a set of choices at the beginning that you wouldn't have if you were, a couple with one male partner and one female partner who were planning to try in the regular, ordinary sex way. And so there's like, do you have donor? Do you use a known donor? Do you use a non-known donor? Do you use frozen sperm? Do you use fresh sperm? Do you try to conceive in this way? And then there's all kinds of, if you have two uteruses, do you do like reciprocal IVF, where it's one uterus and somebody else's egg? There's a lot of choices. And I think the range of choices is so great because it allows people to build the families with whoever it works for them, the family that they want. But when you come into this and it's like, oh my gosh, there's like 4,000 choices, it is very helpful to have something that sits down and be like, okay, here are actually the choices you need to make in the order you need to make them. And, there are considerations I never would have thought about, like sperm is expensive. Like sperm is like $1,500 a vial. Mm-hmm. And so if you use a known donor, you can get a lot of sperm from them, probably for free, more free, but then it's complicated.
What's the price difference between getting a sperm donor versus an egg donor?
Egg donors are much more expensive, but egg donation is, depending on who you're having donate your eggs, is like many, many thousands of dollars. So yes, a sperm is cheaper, but your friend's sperm is free.
It also probably comes with so many different...
But it comes with strings. It comes with strings.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I have been able to be very close to so many people who've gone down different non-traditional paths of growing their families. And it's incredible how many avenues people can go down to grow their family as individuals or as couples, and explore so many different routes. And also it's very overwhelming. Whatever you're trying to conceive journey is very overwhelming. But then if you go a non-traditional route, the options are, it's just a lot to learn, for a lot of people in a very short amount of time, because as you were saying, people decide to take interest in their fertility when they're like, why aren't I getting pregnant? Or I'm ready right now. I want to do this. And then you're like, but you got to learn some things first.
I mean, I think this is such a great point. And I think what part of the way we wanted to design the content here is to be able to have you consume it like all at once, because I think it is so true of these moments in fertility. Like there's a moment when you first decide, like, okay, we're ready to start trying for a baby. Right. When the first thing you want to do is just read everything about like, how can I make this work? And how can I get the best chance of making this work as quickly as possible? So then you want to know, when exactly should I have sex? How do you track ovulation? These like, what do I do during the 2-week wait? These like basic things. And then if you end up arriving in a place where you're facing some infertility, there's again a moment of like, I want to read everything. I want to understand exactly what are the options, what is the path that I might end up on, like what are going to be the forks. And similarly, if you're starting a family in a less traditional way, there's a moment when you'll decide to do it and then are faced with choices. And so I really want people to be able to come in and like immediately deep dive into what they actually, all the questions that they have in the moment. So they're ready to make these decisions and they're not, dripping information in tiny little bips over time.
That can be a lot. When it comes to environmental and lifestyle factors that impact people's trying to conceive journey, do you have anything specifically that's good for people to know about?
I mean, I think that one thing is people probably overstate the importance of some of these, at least overstate the quality of the evidence around some of these like lifestyle factors, or like maybe environmental factors like fragrance exposure. And like, there's a lot of discussion of stuff like that, which is not well supported by the data. There are lifestyle factors which we know matter for both men and women. Heavy alcohol or marijuana usage for both men and women impacts fertility. Mm-hmm. There are, of course, conditions like PCOS or endometriosis that can impact fertility and that sometimes are not diagnosed. So there are certainly cases in which people have an underlying condition that would impact their fertility and they don't know about it until they start to try. But, other than these kind of big picture things, a lot of what gets raised, like, did you eat enough kale? Or, are you drinking the right kind of electrolytes? That does not show up in the data.
Right. You were mentioning earlier just the idea that we don't educate, or we're not educated, or we don't talk as much about fertility early enough in life and in schools. When is too early to talk about it, and when would you recommend people start talking to their kids or asking schools to talk about it?
I'd like to have some information in sex ed that is not just about how to not get pregnant. Not that I think we should be teaching teenagers how to get pregnant, but I think as part of that education, it would be great if we also spent some time explaining, like, when you, like, eventually you may face a time in which or just this is how your fertility works. Like, this is how the menstrual cycle works. At the beginning, the lining grows. There's a point in the cycle in which pregnancy is most likely. Then there's a point in the cycle in which it's not. Here's what makes for a healthy sperm. There's some basic stuff that I think, a little bit of information about the relationship between fertility and age. Just some of that, I think, really could be put into a sex ed curriculum pretty seamlessly and would set people up in a much better way. Now, in my ideal world, we would be teaching people this in their early 20s. There would be like a required class for people in college. Okay. Basically, like your senior year of college, you would have to take a class about fertility. And like, it could be like a mini course. It would have to be a whole semester. Just like, just a little course about like, hey, one of the things you might want to do in your life later is have kids. And here are some things that you should know about like how your body works and the relationship between those workings and eventual fertility. But I'm not sure I'll get that in.
Well, I mean, listen, I
do teach it at college. I could put it into my class, which is about social policy. I'd be like, at the end of this, we're going to discuss your fertility.
Yeah. Buckle up.
Buckle up. We're showing pictures. It's going to be great.
By the way, I had that in, when I was in college, I did a minor in gender studies, and we had a whole part of our gender studies class that was just about fertility, conception, learning all about your cycle.
People should know how to track their cycle.
Exactly. And also should know that all of the apps aren't like a cookie cutter app on how to track your cycle. Because I've had a lot of friends log their cycles in these apps and been like, why aren't I getting pregnant? Or, oops, it said I could have sex at this time and I accidentally did get pregnant. So there's, a lot of different information. When it comes to information, I feel like this, if it's pregnancy, parenting, trying to conceive, we live in a world where there's a lot of information, and sometimes too much information is just too much. How do you monitor as an individual, like what is too much?
Yeah, I think what's too much is when the information comes when you are not ready for it. And I think this is what's really tough sometimes about sort of social media. Yeah, is like you're getting the information is a push, like not a pull. So I think if really the way that people were getting information is they were saying, I'm curious about X. I have this question about my fertility or about my pregnancy or my parenting or my health or whatever it is. And they were like going to the internet and finding it. I think, we could help people say like, here are some more valuable resources and less valuable resources. But ultimately, if you're looking, I think that's a time in which usually you can find good information. I think the place where it gets to be just like too much and people are not able to process and all they hear is the panic is when it's like, I'm just trying to scroll my feed and like, watch hair influencer videos. And then all of a sudden it's like, your children are being ruined by screen time, or like your sperm are dying at high rates. It's like, where's the hair influence? I wasn't ready for this. And I think that's where the information really becomes too much.
Yeah. And it's also, people often post things and they say like trigger warning for certain subjects, which almost is kind of like, what is the trigger? Like it makes you
clickbait. Yeah. I'd like to know more about that.
It's a tricky thing to put out so much information and also be consuming the information. And then, you sit there and it says, oh, if you consumed Gatorade in these years, then this is going to be, and then you're just like, did I do that? I mean,
this is, I think so much of what I try to do in social stuff is almost reactive in the sense that like people are in my DMs all the time and they're like, what about this? What about that? If I get enough of like, what about this reel? What about this claim? That it's time to like put something up and be like, you probably saw this reel about like how daycare makes your kid think you're dead. Yeah. And like, here's what the data is about that. So you don't think it.
Yeah. That's originally, honestly, how I found you when I think I was pregnant with my first daughter, was just like this, you probably saw that this is going around and, it's actually
you did see it.
Calm down. And, so that's really helpful. I think, this program is such a huge gift to so many people who are in this journey or will be in this journey of trying to conceive. And it's been out for 3 weeks now?
Yeah.
What has been kind of like the biggest takeaway that you've seen so far with people exploring the newsletter, the website, this subject.
I mean, it's been awesome. And I think my main takeaway is like, people have a lot of questions and we need more good answers. And so I think we're continuing to push, especially on a lot of these sort of more specific infertility questions, really making sure that like those questions are answered for people. But it's been great to hear how many questions people have, and also how much there is a just clear need for this sort of unfiltered science-based evidence in making these choices.
I feel like this is a subject that you've talked a lot about over the years, but now you have something that's specifically geared to just people on this journey, or even people, you know, like myself, who want to support friends and people on the journey and want to be able to also talk to them in a great and supportive way. And I feel like this program is really offering that, and it's so exciting. So when you sent it to me to be aware of that it was launching, I was like, this is so amazing, because I know so many people who are on this journey or have been on this journey and have not had access to all of this information, and also just the support in general, because it's a very isolating and lonely experience for so many people. And the information that you're putting out there, I think, is going to not only create comfort and knowledge for people, but also a huge community in the TTC community.
I hope so.
That you have, you know, already in your world, but specifically for people going through this.
I hope so. I mean, that is the goal. So, and I so appreciate the support on this and then getting the word out. That's the most important thing for us. So thank you.
I loved it. I could sit and go over panic headlines with you all day long. Thank you so much to Emily for coming on BDA Baby again. I always love having her on. She calms the nerves on so many different subjects when it comes to parenting or starting your family. And I'm really excited for this new program she just launched. And I encourage you guys to go check it out. And thanks, Emily.